"What is the ship doing?" The lead scanning technician, without looking up from their post, quietly murmured, "Sitting there, menacingly." A soft snort from the technician to their right, then 2 stifled smirks later, and the team lead stood, saluted, and addressed the officer on deck. "Remaining inert, sir. No signs of activity." Gripping the arm of the command chair, the lieutenant tried very hard not to look very nervous, and failed with modest notice from the others on the deck. Shuffling from one side to the other without lifting from their seat, he cleared his throat, then addressed the crew. "Maintain position and increase scanner resolution by 10% each cycle until I return," he announced, then abruptly departed, already dreading the next destination, the captain's chambers, one hallway away and almost on another world. After the mandatory 3 knocks the announcement required given, the lieutenant then opened the door to the expansive space behind the armored bulkhead. Upon entering the steam-filled chamber, the lieutenant stifled the urge to wave a hand in front of his face and clear his line of sight, settling on sticking close to a wall for navigational purposes. From the haze occupying the center of the room, a voice echoed, "Is there news from the enemy's ship, Lieutenant?" The captain's tone was mild, almost free of hidden threats, practically an invitation. Only an idiot would fall prey to that easy of a snare, and the lieutenant was anything except unwary. He smiled amicably and addressed the foggy nexus in the middle of the room. "No changes to the internal heat mapping. The same inert and broadcast-free scans that we found yesterday on the hull. It hasn't moved, nor is anything moving inside of it, as best that we can tell without repositioning." The final word was almost strangled out of his mouth as the bulky nude form of the captain erupted into view, clamping a hand over his throat and lifting him bodily from the deck plating, his eyes locked in terror as she easily pinned him in place. 2 feet taller and half again his weight, she was beyond a match for him on his best day, and it was anything except that. "You haven't activated the engines again, have you, Lieutenant?" Her angry hiss of a voice echoed in his ears, prompting him to shudder in fear, head trembling as he affected a shake to the negative, robbed of the ability to speak. "Good," she said, then released him, allowing him to fall bodily to the floor, gasping for breath, eyes streaming tears. Casually she dried herself off with his cape of office, then nudged him to the floor with the foot the length of his head. "Per protocol, we will wait for them to make the first move. Unlike my compatriots, I won't make the mistake of jumping to a conclusion and ruining the surprise." She smirked, then nudged the frail officer again. "Have the human brought to my ready room in 15 minutes. Bring a mop and several tourniquets." Dismissed, the lieutenant didn't even rise to his feet, instead scrambling on the floor madly for the door, and the dubious safety of the corridor beyond it. Deep with the precise, clinical workings of the ship, a gurney was moved down the passageway, a technician and a nurse keeping pace with the automated transport. Neither did more than give cursory attention to the bound figure on the flat, cold slab, as it levitated silently down the corridor, instead looking to each other, and periodically out of the windows of the object floating over 3 kilometers away. Flashes of orange-red light lining the frames, a stroboscopic repainting of the 3, as they moved. At the halfway point, the bound figure, their arms clinched into flexible sleeves, angled their head to look at the starry perpetual night, a sea of glittering light shining dispassionately. In a rare moment of illumination provided by one of the ship's perpetually roving spotlights, the form parallel to the ship was cast into stark relief, and the smile which formed on their bruised, aching face was almost bone-deep, followed by a mirthful chuckle. The nurse, already a cautious sort, paused and brought the technician's attention silently to the subdued jubilant of the prisoner, his eyes widening in apprehension. The technician, a veteran of the spaceways, also paled notably, and both of them kept a full 5 meters behind the rolling gurney, their strides in lockstep, faces growing more and more coated in sweat. Reaching the honor guard defending the door to the captain's chambers, neither of them approached, and simply saluted, gesturing to the gurney, and the nurse spoke aloud, a touch louder than necessary. "Gurney code is 66, then the number on the back panel," he said, and the nurse retreated first, followed by the technician, both of them heading away at a full-on run. The honor guards, 3 lifelong veterans, exchanged a brief glance each before one of them moved into position behind the gurney, activating it into manual push mode. Laying on his back, the prisoner was smiling as he entered the captain's chambers, eyes wet with joyous tears, silently laughing as if in hearty jest. "As requested, the primary guard said, then held up the control pad tethered to the back of the gurney. Looks like they fitted him with the automated tourniquets and set up a blood filter for his lower half. He paused, then saluted smartly, nodding to the captain. Captain! The captain, now dressed in her full regalia, approached the honor guards and dismissed them with a gesture, her demeanor gentle. Those were not rank and file drawn from the peasants of their world. They were combat veterans, honed in battle on a dozen worlds in almost 30 campaigns each, tried and tested, survivors one and all. They would never earn her dismissive nor sadistic replies. Few would countenance them, in fact. She herself ascended to captain through mutiny. Once they were alone, the air swiftly became clearer. All of the fog replaced with cold, briskly moving air. She laid a thin, handmade blanket over the prisoner's lower half, smoothing it out carefully, then spoke, her wide, cool smile as lifeless as the vacuum outside of the bay windows, in her suite. "Lieutenant," she said, her tone almost conversational, "you seem to be in a much better mood since we removed that awful rotten foot you had." She gently tapped her talon-capped finger on the stump, fixed as his knee. His wince, response enough to diminish his smile, almost as much as it broadened hers. "We didn't even charge it to your account, which I hope that you'll take into consideration when you return to the mines on our home world. I've grown tired of the screams you used to make, and I'll soon enough find another toy. There's so many of you to choose from, really." The lieutenant, his eyes crisp and alert, looked up at her, defiance in his bloodshot gaze. "Captain," he said, with a line of reddish ooze dripping from his partially emptied mouth, licking his lips with a fresh coat of blooded saliva. "I suspect that you're going to do this song and dance routine, threaten me with further pain, and then finally ask me a question." He raised his eyebrows. "You're as predictable as you are fearsome, and I will admit, up until about 4 minutes ago, yeah, I was fucking petrified of you." He shrugged. She glowered. He smirked. She slapped. Wincing from the physical rebuke, he exhaled, then shook his head. "This is about what's outside of your ship and why we haven't been moving for what, almost 2 cycles now?" She squinted at him, snarling before she gripped his face, aiming it at hers, her claws digging into the meat of his skull, almost deep enough to gouge our meat. Instead, a pair of thin, runny lines of blood began to flow from each wound, her talons' edges cutting just enough to draw forth pain and a further groan of agony. She had harmed him greatly dozens of times, and they'd done a great many dances. "Tell me about that ship!" she hissed, her eyes narrowed into a hateful gaze. He spat, her index claw coated in the dribbled-out drool and blood mixture, and he grinned more. "It's not a ship, Captain." She paused, leaning in more, although careful to keep out of biting distance. She had lost part of an ear to that error, and he was missing a thumb in retaliation. "We plotted its path from your homeworld, Lieutenant," she replied. "There's no other habitable planets, shipyards, wreck fleets, or even battle skies in that corridor. We have scanned it 100 times. It's even got your homeworld's radiation signature from the Carad bombings." She frowned. Both of their species had been victims once to the terrors that was the Carad fleet and their freely distributed bombing runs. The people of Sol 3 hired her people to flush them out of hiding behind the moons of Saturn, which they did with gusto, and the human response was to exterminate the entire fleet of Carad bombers with strategic drones. In response to the obvious threat presented by the humans, her race declared war almost immediately, and thus began their 6-year war. "Captain," the human said, "there's nothing in me that you can cut, spindle, or mutilate, which is going to change the facts. That is not an Earth-made ship. You can break every bone in my body a dozen times, slaughter my prom date, and shoot my dog, and it won't make that thing into an Earth-made ship." His tone was almost conversational, even if his gaze was a mirror of hers. She stepped back, glancing to the window, then looked to the prisoner. "You have new allies?" She asked the question, seeking his approval, only inasmuch to confirm a theory. He shook his head, then shrugged, that quintessential gesture of all humans. One of her junior officers once tried to mimic that casual emotional response, and was skinned alive in front of his peers as a warning. She periodically visited him in the recovery bay. She routinely brought corrosives. "Are they invaders?" He paused, then shook his head, gesturing with his chin. "No, I don't think that they are. Not really," he said. If you want to live a long life, you need to stop being paralyzed by new things or fresh developments, Captain. He sounded sympathetic, which seemed alien to her, as she had robbed him of a full limb, half of another, and 4 digits, all in the quest to break him of the ability to lie. She had become successful, and somehow there was cold comfort as he continued to speak. "Whatever it is that you do," he said, "make sure that you keep it illuminated at all times. Don't let it drift into shadows." He grinned, then closed his eyes. "Those spotlights are what's keeping you alive." He drew in a deep breath, then exhaled, mouth gaping slightly. She furrowed her brow, moving to stand over his beaten, reduced form, gripping the gurney. He could survive even more removals than agony, she knew, yet somehow he seemed to have achieved a peaceful state of mind. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice cold, commanding. "What is it? Speak plainly. You act as if it has given you some sort of faith in your survival odds. We both know that you'll die in my custody." He stiffened, then nodded solemnly. "On that, Captain, I cannot argue," he said, then opened his eyes, both of them leaking clear, salty tears. "Yet still I will escape you. You will not escape what's coming. I bet what's left of my body that you've not heard a single word from your command since reporting the sighting of it, and that since you've gone stationary, all it has done is nothing. You obey the order. When encountering something new, go inert and study. Await further instructions." He smirked. "You're blushing, Captain, so I know that I'm correct." He chuckled, then gently angled his head, her hand laying close enough to allow him to rub his cheek against her clawed fingers, her grip tightening on the edge of the gurney. The gesture seemed to convey affection, or something close to it. "I'm going to miss our little chats, Captain," he said, then looked at her with bright, shining eyes. She realized what was about to happen too late, as he angled his teeth over her thumb, crushing the knuckle hard enough to induce her into clenching her fist, carving a series of wounds into his soft, tender throat. His laugh clotted with blood as she reflexively drew her wounded hand close to herself. He bled to death as she stared at him, his defiant gaze glazing over, the smile never diminishing for a single second. Blood dripped to the floor as she then looked to the windows, a further realization striking her. Outside, a single flash of light blinked once, and then something in her ship gave a soft, gentle pop, and the night sky claimed another patch of the world. A dozen more flashes and the world outside was painted black, and the oblong shape loomed in full midnight, lit up only in contrast to the dots of distant, cold stars. An alarm rang and her door opened, bringing news and a junior officer. "Captain," he said, "we have reports of shots fired. Our spotlights have been targeted. We can't see the ship." He saw what the captain saw. Outside, a series of lights began to ignite, all paired, first a dozen, then 100, and finally several thousand. They blinked, their orange, blue, green, yellow, red, and purple dots vanishing and reappearing, and gave the impression of movement in the dark, a tide forming in silence. "All aft engines to full charge now!" she shouted, then pushed the junior officer back to the command deck's direction, angrily kicking over the corpse on the gurney, his blood adding to the floor's decor in a splattering spray. "Go! Now! Get us out of here!" She stomped to the command deck, the junior officer already a dozen paces ahead of her, frantically trying to convey her orders over the comm system. As she arrived to her chair, she saw new signatures on the exterior sensors. It was no longer thousands, it was tens of thousands, and they were not staying on the opposite structure. They were inbound at considerable speed. "Security!" she bellowed. "Give me data! What are those things?" Bringing up an exterior camera feed, the technical officer then keyed in the code to display it on the command deck's wide screen. What they saw silenced and stilled them. Human figures, each of them charcoal grey and black, naked and angry, moving with hand tools and crude weapons, all lashed into long ropes of each other. A cable was wound from one's waist to a figure behind them, and so forth, creating a vast network of lines. They could hear the sounds of their arrivals everywhere, almost all at once, and the lighting seemed to dim. "Engine room reporting," the technical officer said, breaking the silence. "Intakes 3, 6, and 8 through 15 are all jammed. They don't know what it is, Captain." She slumped into her chair, staring in growing horror. "We have reports of boarding efforts at the reactor hatches and atmospheric refueling ports, Captain," another said, and the lights dimmed again. Someone began to softly moan in fear, silenced by a fellow officer with a strong slap in the reduced light. The noises grew in volume and source numbers, and the captain stared, paralyzed by indecision and fear. Fear was a newfound friend, inherited from an enemy recently dead by her own hand. She looked at the gory appendage and closed her eyes, shaking. "Captain," the lieutenant at her side said, "we've been boarded. Decks 2, 4, 5, 8 and anything below 11. Every hatch has been forced open from the outside, apparently." He gulped, then handed her his sidearm. Tradition demanded that she use it on him for his failure to secure the ship. She stared at the firearm, then up at him, squinting in non-comprehension. She was about to speak when the lights died. They did not return. There were no emergency backups, as all available power was routed automatically to life support systems. Illumination was not considered a shipwide priority by the designers, as their race could easily see in reduced lighting conditions. They never expected one of their ships of the line to fall so badly nor quickly, losing power to anything except life support itself. In the darkness, a knock was audible. Then another. And another. Gulping, the captain stood, then spoke. "Everyone," she said clearly, "you are to stand down and await my next command. Until then, compose yourselves and remember your station duties. If they are not possible, remember your caste. If you forget that, remember your rank." She then took a step into the darkness. Then another. And another. When she stood tall at the door, it opened, wrenched apart by that enormous strength of what lay on the other side of it. It was taller than she, heavier, and was only human in the barest of shapes. In the dim illumination provided by the failing instrument panels, she saw its skin was composed of a rock-like material, those hands well formed, coated in the blood of what was likely the bumpy masses that were her honor guard in the corridor. "Captain," it said, a voice like an echoing cave, extending its hand to her. "A moment to chat, if you'd be so kind." The voice did not expect resistance, nor receive any. She walked, and it joined her, his gait surprisingly light on his massive and clawed feet. On his back, enormous wings, mottled in black and grey, mimicry of the structure parallel to her ship, almost perfect. As she walked, she kept her head high, and spoke firmly. "If it's to happen," she said, "my chambers will suffice. Spare my crew." The creature paused, then gave a solemn nod. "Done." Her door was bent inward, warped by the phenomenal amount of damage brought by all three of her honor guard being smashed into each other, then the frame of the door itself, reducing all of them into their component pieces. She stepped gingerly through the ruin of her crew and the door, while it strided without concern, more footprints left in its wake. She moved to her ensuite bar, mixing a drink as it righted the gurney, ignoring the sparks it spat from being wrecked. The body in it was then tucked into the blanket, wrapped from head to toe, bound tightly, a tender gesture to a body which had seen precious little of that. "Your work?" She paused, nodding, as she raised a glass of intoxicating liquid, coughing slightly. "Entirely, yes. He'd been unwilling to share knowledge with me for several months now." She paused, then downed the rest of her beverage, setting the empty glass aside, a napkin placed atop it. "Come and see," it said, then pointed to the windows. She stepped on faltering legs into the starlit window's proximity, staring into the void, and the creature spoke a single word. A moment later, and the truth of it was revealed. Outside was no ship. Measuring 128 meters long, 48 meters across, with a central point of 70 meters, it was a building mounted on a flat slab of rock. Attached to it were dozens of maneuvering thrusters, deceleration buffers, atmospheric shields of several makes and models, and what seemed to be thousands of spike-like protrusions, all emptied. "Our home," it said. "We saw your ship and moved to match its speed. Then we saw what you'd done to him." It gestured to the body. "We made a choice. So did you." It laid an enormous hand on her shoulder, not in pain, nor in rebuke, only to give a sense of scale to her, her legs collapsing beneath her. It held her aloft with that same firm, demanding grasp. She looked up at it, lips parted as she struggled to speak, and it shook its head. "Just you," it said firmly, "and those who stood in our paths. You'll tell us where to find the other ships in your fleet. Pray that they made better choices than you did." It carried her, softly struggling against its incredible strength until it reached the nearest airlock. A crew passage had been created by the woven cords of thousands of travelers to her ship, airtight and temporary. She was thrown bodily across the gulf between the 2 points, pinwheeling in fear and darkness, ready to be received by more strong, waiting hands. In the darkness, the ship was released, and the cables vanished, hauled back by the invaders, leaving the ship to recover and bring light to the world. As they did so, they could see the words written on the base of the building as it continued to float through space, held aloft by tens of thousands of stony wings, their linings coated in solar sails, silently propelling it forward, forward, forward. À la mémoire de Edmé Pierre Poix, maire de Versailles. Décédé le 31 août 1880. Fondation à perpetuity. Du mes anniversaire. Pour lier sa famille. Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Paris. Somewhere in the perpetual midnight, someone screamed for mercy in vain. Someone always did.